Hey, before we dive into this week's episode, if you've been enjoying the show, I'd love your support. Take just 10 seconds to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps others discover the wisdom and inspiration that I share on the Pivot to Balance podcast. Let's build a community of balance seekers together. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to share the love. Now let's dive into the episode. Hello and welcome to the Pivot to Balance podcast. I'm your host, AK, and I hope you're doing well. In a world that pulls us in a million different directions and with a billion distractions, finding balance can feel like an ambiguous quest. Join me on this podcast as I try to navigate life's twists and turns with mindfulness, purpose, and grace. In each episode, we will dive into topics like self-care, personal growth, mindset shifts by sharing practical insights, stories, and maybe even interviews. Get ready to pivot, to recalibrate, and find your balance. Follow the Pivot to Balance podcast, and I will see you on the other side. Welcome back to this week's episode. In this week's episode, I'm going to talk about how it is to outgrow who you used to be and how to sort of deal with it. And before we dive into this episode, though, I do want to ask you a question. I want you to think about the version of yourself from 5 years ago, or maybe even last year or 2 years ago. Do you still resonate with that person? Or does it feel like you've grown so much that there are parts of yourself, or even entirely, that you just don't recognize anymore? If you have ever felt the discomfort of not fitting into spaces, conversations, or even friendships that once felt like home, I think you will like this episode. So think about this. Growth isn't just about learning new things or gaining new experiences. It's about kind of like shedding old versions of yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. So when I moved abroad, I didn't realize how much I would change. I saw the world differently. I met people who incredibly challenged my perspective. I started questioning things I never used to think about. And the people who truly knew me noticed these shifts and they actually celebrated them. But of course, there are people, that don't grow at the same pace as you, and they saw those changes and didn't understand them. And over time, I realized something very, very important through that, which is some relationships, some people, some things, some places, it will adapt and grow with you, and others will just naturally fade. So, which is why I want to talk about outgrowing who you used to be, because if no one's told you yet, it's okay to evolve. It feels like a crime when you're actually evolving because people start telling you things like, you've changed. You're not the person that you used to be anymore. Because of X, Y, and Z, you've changed. It's okay to change. And most importantly, it's okay if not everyone understands it. That is a huge lesson that I've actually learned these last couple of years. If you think about growth, it doesn't actually happen overnight. It's not like you wake up one day and decide, today I've decided to show this attitude to this person. It doesn't happen that way. It's actually very slow, very subtle. You don't even see it happening most of the times, but you see it in these small shifts that you barely notice, right? You see it, but you don't see it. For example, the conversations you once enjoyed start to feel repetitive. Or it could be certain places just don't bring you the same joy they used to. You find yourself biting your tongue in discussions where you used to jump in. You start questioning things you once accepted without hesitation. I actually had a conversation with a friend who was also going on this very same journey. And we had this conversation and we kind of thought about all of these points. And I was like, dude, if you really think about it, I don't even relate to those conversations anymore. And they were like, yeah, I totally get that too. And I think for a while when all of this is happening, it's really uncomfortable. You might even try to shrink yourself back into the person you were just to keep the peace. But growth isn't just about moving forward. I think it's also about accepting that, hey, I've grown up. There are certain things that just do not resonate anymore. And it's really uncomfortable because it's not just for others around you, it's also for yourself. It's like, oh my God, I cannot believe I actually don't resonate with that anymore. And accepting that. I know moments where I felt like I cannot relate to this anymore, and I don't like that I don't relate to this anymore, but I want to relate to it, but I don't accept whatever's happening right now. So the thing about growth is once you expand, you just cannot go back. And nobody really tells you this, but growth can actually feel really lonely.
Hey, if you listen to this podcast, I think you will also love my newsletter, Elevate Gazette. I talk a lot about elevating your professional and your personal lives. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter. Go to anushakhannan.com/email list, and I'm sure you will love it. Join everyone who is like-minded. And now let's get into the episode.
Even if you have people that are like really supportive of your change, it still feels, and I don't mean lonely in the negative sense. I just mean like that is a very solo process. That is for everybody. I think it's more about, it's the guilt that you're changing, and it's that why aren't other people growing with me? These are like the 2 points that I feel like most people go through. It's like some people will make you feel guilty for changing, and like I said, they'll tell you you've changed. It's not a bad thing. They'll say things like, you used to be more fun, or you used to be this, you used to be that. Why are you so serious now? Why are you not thinking about this? Why are you not talking about X, Y, and Z? And if you actually think about it, they don't understand the growth that you've been through. They don't even see that world. It's like you don't even know the other planets exist. You just know Earth. It's like that. And if you actually think about it, they mean well. People do mean well. They just miss the version of you that they knew. And nobody is obligated to be the past version of yourself just to make other people comfortable. And just because someone was a part of your past doesn't mean they're entitled to your future. I feel like this is a conversation I've been having with every single person in my life because everybody's going through some change, some shift, be professionally, personally. And it's like there are 2 parts that are like, oh my God, I've grown. This part is fighting my old version because only one can exist. And it's like we don't know which one to choose, even though we know the default answer is the one that has actually gone through those changes. So if all of this resonates with you, this is what outgrowth actually looks like. And if you still want more, I'll give you a few pointers. I wrote them down. Number 1, you stop craving validation from people who do not align with where you're headed. You set boundaries that you wouldn't have dared to before. You value peace over unnecessary arguments. You start questioning beliefs you once held so tightly. You realize that success and happiness means something entirely different to you now. And again, I'm not going to pretend that this process is smooth. Some days you'll really miss the simplicity of who you used to be. And others, you'll feel so aligned with your new path that you cannot believe you ever lived that kind of life before, right? So I want to give you like a few things I picked up on from people around me and also my own experience. How to move through this whole thing without shrinking back into your old self. Because let's be honest, going back is just not a thing. Unless you've become someone bad and you have to become good. I'm only talking to like the actual growth process people. First of all, let yourself grieve. Growth is not about excitement. Okay. Growth is not just about excitement, it's also about loss. So it's okay to mourn past versions of yourself, friendships that no longer fit, people that no longer fit, routines that once felt very safe to you. Give yourself permission to feel it. Number 2, surround yourself with people who support your evolution. Not everyone will get it, and that's okay. But if you have people in your life that actually get it, the ones who are celebrating your growth instead of trying to keep you where you are, keep them close. Number 3 is understand that discomfort is part of the process. I think one of the first episodes I made was about comfort zones. I think I still stand by that today. There will be days where you doubt yourself, days where you think, was I better off before? You weren't. Spoiler, you just weren't. You're just feeling the weight of the transition. Please do not mistake that for regret. You are becoming the version of yourself that you're supposed to be, that you want to be. It's just growth is uncomfortable. 4th and the last point is remember that you do not need anyone's permission to evolve. You don't owe anyone the old version of yourself. You don't have to explain why you're so different now. Growth does not require an apology. At some point, we all outgrow who we used to be, and some people fight it. They try to hold on to the familiar version of themselves. others lean into it, trusting that there's a reason for the shift. I hate so much getting out of my comfort zone, but I constantly put myself in situations where I'm like being challenged because I also love being challenged. I love feeling like I'm becoming something else that's like the better version of me, even though it feels so uncomfortable. So if you feel like you're disconnected from your past self, if you're outgrowing spaces and people, if you feel the discomfort of basically shedding an old version of you, take a deep breath. It does not mean you're lost. It just means you're becoming. You're becoming the person you're supposed to be. And that is something to be incredibly proud of. I wanted to make this episode because basically this has been my conversation with my friends and people in my life. And I just thought maybe you guys might want to hear this. I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you were outgrowing who you used to be, or you're probably going through that right now? What was the hardest part of that transition? Let me know. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to share this with someone who might relate to this, who might need to hear this today. And don't forget to leave a rating and review. Now go grab a cup of lemon water. I'll see you in the next one. And keep going. You're on the right path.